jai. Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupara Shatara Shata Shishimar Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Shri Guru Devi ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupara Shatara Shata Shishimar Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupara Shatara Shata Shishimar Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupada Shuttara Shutta Shishimar Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupada Shuttara Shutta Shishimar Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada ki jai. Nityalala Pravishta Maha Bhagavat Srila Gaur Kishodas Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Nityalala Pravishta Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura ki jai. Jai Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura ki jai. Nityalala Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Shri Rupanu Gauriya Guru Varga ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Vigyan Bharati Gosai Maharaj ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Balabhatirtha Gosai Maharaj ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Dait Madhav Gosai Maharaj ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Gosai Maharaj ki jai. Nityalala Pravishtam Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Gosai Maharaj ki jai. All the associates of Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All the disciples and followers of those associates ki jai. Jai Srila Baladev Vijibhushan Prabhu ki jai. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai. Shri Narottam Srinivas Shamananda Prabhu Trai ki jai. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Gosai Pad ki jai. Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Bhattadas Raghunath Sharda Gosai Prabhu ki jai. Shri Swarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda ki jai. Namachay Shri Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj ki jai. Shri Radha Kunda Shama Kunda ki jai. Shri Muna Devi Ganga Devi ki jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai. Shri Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Purnamasi Yoga Maya ki jai. Shri Gopishwar Mahadev ki jai. Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Okay, now we'll recite the Mangala Charan and then begin. Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Guruve namaha. Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha. Shri Siddhanta Saraswati Tividito Gauriya Gaurvanvaye Bhato Bhanuriva Prabhata Gagane Yogora Sankirtanai Maya Bharati Mingilo Daragatan Udritya Jiva Niman Krishna Prema Sudabdi Gahana Sukhang Pradat Prabhum Tang Bhaje Vande Bhakti Vinodam Shri Gaur Shakti Swarupakam Bhakti Shastragya Samraja Radha Rasa Sudha Nidhim Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Satchidananda Namine Gaur Shakti Swarupaya Rupanugavarayate Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Vrishabhanusutan vitavamattanum Yamunattatanaгаранандасутам Muralikalagitavinорапарам Bhajagodrumakananakunjavidum Smaragoragadadarkelikalam Bhavagoragadadarapakshachara Shrinugauragadadara Charukathang Bhaja Godrumakanana Kunjavidum Tavai Vasmi Na Jivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigyaya Devi Twang Nayamang Charanantikam Bhaktya Vihina Aparada Lakshai क्षिप्ताश्च कामादितरङ्गमध्ये कृपामयि त्वं शरणं प्रपन्ना वृन्दे नमस्ते चरणारविन्दं भज श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरि गौरभक्तवृन्द हरे कृष्णा Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Dandavat Pranams Nri Hari Prabhu Bhavatarani Mataji Premavati Didi. I see Pramila Didi is there and one other person watching on YouTube, whoever that is, Dandavat Pranams. And also pranams to all the devotees watching in the future, like Shachi Devi, Jai Devavu, Krishna Vallabha Didi, Ananda Pradayani Didi, Anuradha Mataji, Vrinda Didi, Krishna Mai Didi, Madan Gopal Prabhu, and anybody else who's watching. Dandavat pranams. So we are continuing reading this the history about or from about Śrīla Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura from Srivasa's website bigdrum.us. To just catch us up on what we read um, on Nuri Haribu saying, oops, definitely remembered wrong Poirier about a king in around Alexander the Great's time.
No, it was Batterini who
Oh, who
has,
mentioned that? Yeah, yeah. Okay.
yeah, I mentioned to her that actually Poryat is based on the when Alexander the Great had big battles with I think the name of the Maharaj was Puru, and
Okay.
you'll get
For
to
some
it.
reason, I have the word porous in my mind. Is that porous is representing Puru?
Probably about yeah, you probably have the I know there's like it's similar to that. He was so brave, so brilliant, amazing. He fought. He had an elephant tusk through his body and continued to fight.
Oh my God. Whoa.
Alexander was so impressed with.
Whoa. I think Shivas will talk about it. I haven't read the article yet myself, but he mentioned in the beginning, right, that he was going to go through that a
Okay.
little bit. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Okay.
So, oh, and Haribol Acharya Nishta Prabhu and Dinesh. Hare Krishna, Radhe Radhe. Okay, so let's continue reading. I just to catch us up with what we read yesterday, I asked Gemini to give us a summary. So this is a summary from Gemini. Let's see what it says. Okay. Okay, so this is what we read yesterday. This article that Srivas wrote introduces Kedarnath Datta, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, oh sorry, who would later become the great spiritual reformer Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Born into a wealthy and prestigious family in the idyllic village of Ula, his early childhood was prosperous. As a boy, Kedarnath loved listening to recitations of the Mahabharata. However, his childhood was soon shattered by immense tragedy. His father lost the family fortune, and by the time Kedarnath was 11, his father and four of his brothers had died. Battling bouts of depression, he was married at age 12, which was customary at that time, and struggled to find his footing. Can you imagine though, at 11 years old, he had to take on all the responsibility. He became like the man of the house. There's no other, it's just, his father, his four brothers, it was just, he was the only. Um, then rise in Kolkata. Kedarnath's life took a positive turn when his famous poet uncle, Kashi Prasad Ghosh, recognized his intellect and brought him to Kolkata for a proper education. There, Kedarnath flourished. He read voraciously, mastered English and philosophy, joined debate clubs, and began publishing poetry under the pseudonym Mr. ABC. I didn't remember that was a pseudonym that he used. I thought that was just what people called him. Anyways, whatever. It doesn't matter. I probably remembered it wrong. Um, Through the Kolkata intelligentsia, young Kedarnath met Mrs. E. Locke, who is also known as Lydia Lilliebridge Simmons, an American Baptist missionary and poet twice his age. Despite their cultural and age differences, they formed a deep interfaith friendship. Mrs. Locke, who had a profound appreciation for God and even wrote poetry about Radha and Krishna, deeply encouraged Kedarnath's writing. He later dedicated his 1857 debut English poetry book, the Poryad, to her. A horrific homecoming. Just as Kedarnath was preparing for his university exams, he returned to his hometown of Ula to find a living nightmare. The village had been completely decimated by a cholera epidemic. The town's name Ula actually derives from the Bengali word for cholera. Navigating streets, navigating streets filled with corpses and wild dogs, he discovered his last surviving sister had died. He quickly evacuated his sick mother and grandmother to Kolkata. Okay, so now let's continue reading from where we left off. And I remember we recently went to Viranagar, um, which so first the town Bhaktivinoda Thakur where he was born and raised, it was called Ula before, but then after that, we were there was Sundar Gopal from the BRC. He was reading all these excerpts from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Swalikita Jivani, remembering how beautiful and prosperous the town of Ula was. And he gives like this very vivid, beautiful description of that, like how no one had to worry about money or working, and every single day was just a big festival. And he'd describe all the festivals and all the activities everybody would do. It was like the dream utopia. And then all of a sudden, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur returned, and everyone was dead. Just like the roads and everywhere, there's just corpses all over the place. The entire village just died. And from that time, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually wrote, there's like a little booklet called Vijana Gram, which means desolate village. And it's all about this, but it's from a bhakti perspective. Srivas, you can purchase it and like they sell it in the Gaudiya mats and stuff like that in Bengali, this little booklet called Vijan Gram. And Srivas was translating that before. He actually made some YouTube videos about that book, Vijan Gram. But yeah, I just remember when we were there. Oh yeah, so Ulagram or Ula, it became completely empty, desolate, and it remains like that for 40 years. It was just like a ghost town. And then after 40 years, they renamed the village to Virnagar. I think maybe they renamed it just to like, forget all the memories of that ghost town, and like give it a new thing. And so yeah, later it became Virnagar. And but yeah, when we were hearing about that history, it was so intense, like the contrast from what it used to be into what it became. So okay, let's continue on. Let's just read from this paragraph. This is the last thing we read. A desolated hometown. It seems almost everyone died of cholera in those days in that region of the world. Before attempting his university entrance examinations, for presumably the second time, the Thakur made a trip back to his hometown of Ula. He had not heard any news from his home in some time, so he thought everything was just fine. He's just going back to visit home. And remember, like how you have to hear the description of how beautiful the town of Ula was before. Also, that gives like that makes it. Anyways, when Kedarnath docked in Ula after a stormy night up the Ganga by boat, he and his companion found a group of men laughing and joking in a stupor of cannabis intoxication. Other than these madmen, the village was desolate. It had been decimated by cholera. The scene the Thakur describes is gruesome. Corpses lying all about. Most houses deathly silent. Others punctuated by wails of pain from those dying. And the local dogs in a craze of bloodlust, fearless of humans, emboldened by the abundance of human flesh. Rushing to his home against the advice of rushing to his home against the advice of friends and neighbors, he discovered his last sibling, his younger sister, had died, and his mother was sick, though she seemed to be recovering. The next day, he quickly evacuated his mother and grandmother to Kolkata, stopping in Ranagat briefly to check on his 10 or 11-year-old bride, who was also sick but recovering. Back in Ula, right? Because Bhaktivinoda Thakur he got married when he was 11, and his bride was only 5 years old. So now Bhaktivinoda Thakur is 18, I think, or 17, and now she's 11. So back in Ula, thousands died within a few months. Survivors fled en masse. Yet this was not the first time cholera had struck the town. There had been recurrent outbreaks in the region since at least 1817. The name Ula itself came from the Bengali word for cholera, Ola Uta, which literally means to come up and out. Evidently, the local goddess was named Ula Chandi in an attempt to ward off this recurrent curse. Turning to God. Young Kedarnath entrusted the care of his elderly grandmother to a relative in Kolkata and found his mother accommodations elsewhere. They had no money and no one to help because people thought his mother was rich. Meanwhile, Kedarnath himself battled cholera fevers 3 times in a row while trying to take care of his mother and grandmother and study for his entrance examinations. In his autobiography, the Thakur confesses to suffering profoundly during this period, till he gradually found solace in heartfelt discussions about God with some select friends. At first, he found no one he could at first he found no one he could properly converse with. But he began visiting Dvijendranath Thakur, the older brother of his schoolmate Satendranath. And they're also relatives of are isn't if I might be wrong, but I think he's also the brother of Rabindranath Tagore, who's the everybody knows him. Anyways, so the Thakur gushes in appreciation of Dvijendranath, lauding him as the closest friend he ever had. Dvijendranath was of good, honest character and detached from worldly matters. In his company, the Thakur returned his thoughts exclusively to the science of God, for it was the only science that quelled the anxiety cropping up in his heart, he writes. He read Kant. Sorry, I'm not going to be getting these names wrong, but because I don't know much about uh, philosophy, but Kant, Goethe, or Swedenborg. God, I'm gonna get sorry. Schopenhauer, Hume, Voltaire, and others, and discuss them with
Voltaire, Voltaire, bro.
what? How do you say it?
Voltaire,
Okay,
famous
Voltaire.
philosopher. Yeah.
Okay, and others, and he discussed them with Dvijendranath. The young Kedarnath, finding his mental strength, finding his mental strength doubled by the words and company of Dvijendranath, became a regular guest speaker on philosophy at some academic clubs. So he was then invited to the British India Society, which was an unlikely alliance between British and American abolitionists, former East India and also former East India Company (EIC) officials, private merchants, and members of the Bengali elite. It had formed in 1839, just a year after the Thakur's birth. Although it was a short-lived organization, its members posited that India's vast agricultural potential could ethically produce sugar and cotton to outcompete and eventually dismantle the slave-based economy of the American South. They simultaneously advocated for private enterprise and the reform of the East India Company's governance. Kedarnath Datta, just 19 years old, delivered a presentation at his assembly that was welcomed as profound and thought-provoking. At another meeting of this same group, he recited his own English rendition of Vetala Panchavinshati, an 11th century Sanskrit compilation of fables. That day, the Thakur notes, a great debate ensued, and from then on, he was lauded a logician among his friends. Reverend Dahl, a friend of Mrs. Locke's, attended these presentations. He and the Thakur maintained a close relationship. They had extensive discussions on theology, and he mentored the Thakur in his reading of the Bible and other Christian books. The Thakur confesses that he thus developed a deep faith in Jesus Christ. At some point in 1857, Kedarnath Datta traveled to Burdwan and presented a copy of his first volume of the Poriad to the king of Burdwan, Maharaj Mahatab Chand, who read some of it and liked it. Upon his return to Kolkata, Kedarnath discovered his grandmother bedridden, on the verge of death. He had been on a high, thinking he would study, write, print books, lecture, and make money, whereby he could find a place for his mother, grandmother, and young wife to all live together finally. But the reality was harsh. His grandmother was dying. There was little money, and he had few trusty acquaintances. Just reading all this, it's like I think tomorrow, yeah, tomorrow we're gonna continue going through Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songs describing his life. And so now we have some context to understand like what he's, you know, yeah, this this whole history. Because we hear like we'll see in the songs tomorrow. It will like when he's talking about Swajana Palan Kori Ekamani, Bhulino Tum Mare Hari, all these different things. You'll see that's okay, he must be referring to this like that. Sometime after his grandmother's death, Kedarnath managed to secure two private tutorships and, after a few months, a position as a second grade teacher at his former school. Things were looking up. He rented a house in a nice neighborhood called Sundri and furnished it with a couple of canopy beds, a cot, one table, two chairs, and a single clothes rack. He even hired the help of a servant and maid. This he barely managed on a monthly income of 15 to 20 rupees a month, plus whatever he earned from selling copies of the Puriad. The Thakur writes that while living in the Sundari house, he would frequently visit the poetess, Mrs. Locke. He describes her as an older woman, perhaps to dismiss any untoward assumptions. He confesses, however, that his poetry pleased her, and she showed him much affection. He further describes her a spiritualist who showed him many spiritual manifestations. Supposedly, she would invoke spirits to dance on her table. The Thakur validates these experiences somewhat, writing, "She could see the spirits, but I could only hear the sound of their dancing." Young Kedarnath Datta did not manage to stay at his rented house in Sunri for more than a few months. His income was not sufficient, and his mother had to sell some jewelry to cover the back rent. He was forced to move, he was forced to move his mother and wife to the home of the relative who had accommodated his grandmother. He struggled to find work in Kolkata, and eventually, the next year, in 1858, set out for Orissa at the behest of his paternal grandfather, who had foreseen his own death and wanted the Thakur to be present in Orissa when that occurred. In Orissa, the Thakur's fortunes took a turn for the better. There, there he managed to have an English school established and gained employment there as a teacher by the personal recommendation of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. The Poriad still came somewhat in handy there when he entertained English officials who visited. Beyond this, there is no more mention of the Poriad in the Thakur's autobiography. Here's a picture of young Bhaktivinoda Thakur. This is probably around 1858. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was born in 1938, right? Am I correct about that? I think so. So he must have been 20 here. Um, the Poriad. An act of, sorry, am I saying that right? The Poriad. 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 The Poriad. An act of artful devotional defiance. The task that beckons now is to peruse the Poriad itself for clues as to what heart-stirring truths the Thakur distilled into it that earns the appreciation of the highly artistic and devoted Christian Mrs. Locke. Um, okay, for one, for one, the Thakur's choice of protagonist, Puru or Porus, the Indian king of the ancient Vedic clan of Puru, who is said to have been defeated by Alexander, even though Alexander then turned back and did not venture any further into India. And the opening lines of his composition express a nationalist fervor that makes clear his feelings as a young Indian man growing up under the looming specter of the British Raj. But on closer inspection, the Thakur's composition proves to be more than that. It is a calculated, well camouflaged move to establish and extol the glories of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. In the front matter of his booklet, the Thakur adds an advertisement wherein he argues the merits of the poetic versus the factual, contrasting Shakespeare with Jeremy Bentham, the father of utilitarianism. He concludes by asserting that he does not intend to simply please men at their leisure hours, but also see some historical importance attached to his work. By his own admission, the Thakur was never much good at math. He was of a more artful bent. As he sat in his maternal grandfather's home, in the corridor near the deity of Krishna Chandra Rai, studying maths and other subjects he was not so much interested in, what do you, dear reader, suppose crossed his young fervent mind, if not wonder as to the identity and story of Krishna? He makes it clear that he always had a longing to know the truth about God. All along he was trying to find Krishna, much like Parikshit Maharaj, inquiring from anyone he could on the topic. Haribo Gokuleshwari Didi. Porus was a descendant of Maharaj Puru and the even more ancient Pururavas, both prominent members of the Chandra Vangsha, or lunar dynasty to which both Krishna and the Pandavas belonged. The Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus mentions that Porus's shoulder, sorry, he mentions that this Roman historian mentions that Porus's soldiers bore flags with the insignia of Hercules, or Heracles, who is often equated with Hari Krishna. What is that? How do you say that?
Heracles, which is
Heracles.
deriving from the word Hari Kulesh. And Vrindavan, so Bhatrini was right on about that line. And the Porus wore that flag with the insignia of Heracles. But it was actually, instead of Hare Krishna, it was Hari Kulesh, which is actually could translate as Hare Krishna.
Okay.
Vrindavan is the eldest son, Bhatrini's eldest son. He's been writing about Vedic history. He actually has like a PhD on it. And that was one of the things, the connection, and how the Romans actually would come to India. And so all the names, and the Greeks, especially the Greeks, they came to learn logic from, the centers like Nadia. So many of the names then became Greek, and then they have the appearance of Hercules.
Okay, very fascinating.
Somehow I think Bhatrini is saying that he connected to Balaram.
Hercules is connected, is actually Balaram.
Oh.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, some of they took, even the father of Alexander, the tomb was discovered in the early 90s, and he had Lord Shiva in his shield. He had, of course, the swastika, and so the connection was very strong between India and the Greeks. They would come to India, they look up to the Vedic civilization. But then later, the conquerors and British, they obscure the history and the connections to.
Wow, very fascinating. Wow, very neat. So, so the Roman historian um, Quintus Curtius Rufus mentions that Porus's soldiers bore flags with the insignia of Heracles. Did I say that right? I think so, right? Who is often equated with Hare Krishna, or what Prabhu was saying before. Um,
Well, the
so
one that notice
yes.
just see the there was the Iliad written by Homer, and that was an epic, semi-historical, with the Trojan Wars and like that. So where the demigods are involved and Poseidon and all this stuff, and so I think that's what he here, hence the parallel, porus poriad,
Okay.
yad. That's how you
Yeah, yeah.
pronounce it, poriad.
Okay, add. Okay, that's okay. So Ishvari Prasad and other scholars have a string of arguments to fortify the idea that Porus was a Shuraseni descendant of Krishna and the Yadus. Back in Krishnanagar, Krishna's town, at the very beginning of his educational journey, the Thakur had sat in a stairwell beneath a figurine of Ganesh by some fateful synchronicity, listening to recitations of the Mahabharata. He mentions his natural attraction to the character of Bhima, a valiant warrior and dear friend of Krishna. The bulky footnotes on the first few pages of the Poriad, explaining who Bhima and Bhishma are, confirm the Thakur's enduring appreciation of the Mahabharata and spell out the Thakur's designs to weave stories of Bhima specifically into his poem about Porus, which he intended to consist of 12 parts. The Thakur's choice of protagonist was undoubtedly shrewd. The young Kedarnath Datta knew that he could not debate the English on the I don't know how to say that word, historicity, the historical authenticity of Puranic figures like Krishna and the Pandavas. Meanwhile, the whole of India was in a desperate struggle to resist the British enterprise. The year he published the Poriad was the year of the Sepoy Mutiny, or the Indian Rebellion of 1857, one of the most significant uprisings against the British East India Company. This work of poetry was the Thakur's um, sublimated fight against the British, an appeal to their higher selves and finer sensibilities. It was the gentle voice of the muse he hoped would reach them when they were receptive to it in their leisure hours. In their leisure hours. Sorry if I mispronounce some words. I'm not familiar with all the words. In countering the British assault on his homeland, the Thakur chose a literary medium and a point of common historical agreement. He made his thinly veiled satirical stand on those grounds, invoking the memory of the previous failed attempt at conquest by a Western power some 2,000 years prior. That didn't work out too well, he seems to warn. Here's a picture of Surrender of Porus to Alexander, the 1865 engraving by Alonzo Chapel. There's a picture of that. Okay. Horus, scion of what the Western scholar will perhaps forever view as the mythological lunar dynasty, proved something in his undeniable deterrence of Alexander. His historically acceptable existence is a glorification of Sri Krishna in itself. It speaks not only to the indomitable spirit of Indians in his time, or in the Thakur's time or now, in our time, when India is the most popular populous nation on earth, and the majority of its citizens cherish Lord Shri Krishna in one way or another. But to all children of God resisting the onslaught of exploitation now and forever into the distant past and future, the Thakura's well-chosen protagonist transcends time and space in his representation of Sri Krishna, for that is the simple effect of one who, like the Thakur and the valiant King Puru, who was presumably a devotee of Krishna as well, gave their lives in service to that one ultimate beautiful reality. Krishna defends and empowers those who surrender unto him, as promised in the Bhagavad Gita. Woven into the fabric of the Poriad are other eternal truths resonating irrepressibly from the Thakura's divine heart, like his faith in the holy name as expressed when he writes, "And priests employed to God their prayers now. Almighty Sire, our feeble prayers, O hear! Thy holy name destroys the gloom of fear. How oft we ask thy aid, and not in vain. How oft thy name dispelled our sorrow's train. Thy might has wrought this world, thou dost protect. Thy lash of ruin its vices shall correct." That's from the Poriad, pages 10 to 11. How he was 17 when he wrote that, right? I think so. Yeah. So now leisure hours. The Thakur mentions the title of Mrs. Locke's collection, Leisure Hours, in his dedication to her, and he uses the same phrase in his advertisement on the following page. It is hard to imagine this was an accident. Was it a deliberate homage to Mrs. Locke? Perhaps. At very least, the two of them should have shared a chuckle or two about it. The resonance the Thakur and Mrs. Locke shared was undoubtedly a spiritual one, as corroborated by the comments he makes of her in his autobiography, and the God-centric soul-searching he says he was engaged in when their friendship flourished. The final comment he makes of Mrs. Locke might paint her as an eccentric sort, but her own poetry casts her as someone who is uniquely sensitive. So this is what she says. This is from Thine Eye in Leisure Hours, pages 61 to 62. She says, "Sweet spirits, too, with folded wings I've seen in midnight dreams before the One Most High, the dazzling halo round them. Oh, how faint in the soft beam of thy resplendent eye." In one poem, "With whom and what I sympathize," in Leisure Hours, page 210 to 211, Mrs. Locke proudly declares her partiality for the downtrodden, revealing perhaps too much of a savior's complex, as would fit her occupation as a missionary. That perhaps brings the purity of her friendship with the Thakur into question. How genuine were her sympathies? How much of it was self-serving? Setting aside those doubts, one fact is undeniable. Mrs. Locke was a genuine admirer of Kashi Prasad Ghosh, the Thakur's uncle and main mentor. Surely her appreciation for the uncle extended to the astute nephew. Some experts of her profuse admiration of Kashi Prasad, as expressed in lines on reading the Sher and other poems by Kashi Prasad Ghosh, are as follows. Okay, so this is what she's writing about Bhaktivinoda Thakur's maternal uncle. She says, "The feelings of a tender, noble soul, when crushed by stern adversary 'tis laid, thy ready pen, error dipped in living truth, hath faithfully and fully here portrayed. Thy strains so sweet, so pure, so seraph-like, flow gently from the living fount within, that fount of quenchless, wild, poetic fire, which, burning on, a deathless fame shall win. More worthy hands than mine will twine the wreath of laurel rounds the high, majestic brow, and to thy lofty, noble, heaven-born minds, their spirits with humility will bow. My God, that's quite a glorification. So that's from Leisure Hours pages 153 to 154. Judging from these verses, Kashi Prasad Ghosh had a profound impact on Mrs. Locke. He could have been a mentor to her, having published his renowned work over 15 years prior to hers. The connection between Kashi Prasad and Mrs. Locke is a story in itself, one that serves to illuminate the bond between her and young Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as well as his appreciation for her. Mrs. Locke makes several references to Radha and Krishna, mostly in connection to a particular estate on which used to be the outskirts of Kolkata called Gupta Vrindavan, or Seven Tanks. The lands the estate is situated on was owned by one Umanandan Nandalal Thakur. By the way, every time it says Tagore, that's actually the British. That's the British way. Like it's actually Thakur, and that's how the British. That's what they changed Thakur to is Tagore. Um. So okay, the it's that land that land that the estate is situated on was owned by Umanandan Nandalal Thakur. His mother, near the end of her life, desired to visit Vrindavan, but in those days, going on pilgrimage to far-off holy sites was a perilous undertaking with no certainty of return. To please his mother in her old age, Nandalal put his heart into building a replica of Vrindavan on his vast and scenic tract of land in the Dum Dum area. He even encircled the vast park with 7 excavated kunds or tanks. Kunds. Interesting. I wonder if that's all still there. Dum Dum is where the airport is, right? In Kolkata. Mrs. Locke's collection opens with Sunset at the 7 Tanks and a description of the Christochura, which is Krishna Chura flower. She adds a footnote explaining the significance of this flower, the Krishna Chura flower. So she says, according to the Hindus, the god Krishna, or Christo, was accustomed to decorate his head with green leaves and flowers of this tree. From the circumstance of the former bearing some resemblance in shape to a peacock's feather, it has obtained its name. Krishna is always represented adorned with a peacock's feather. So I guess the leaves of that tree looks like peacock feathers. Huh? Interesting. This opening page was likely the young Thakur's introduction to Mrs. Locke's work.
Interested to know if you don't mind, right here she calls Krishna.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I remember Gurudeva mentioning that, like how it changed from Christo and
yeah, Prabhupada too. That actually, and it's a way to confirm that Jesus came to India and brought back the name Christo. So it's Jesus of the Christ, of the Christo, which is Krishna, the Father.
Yeah, now we have some evidence, not just from our acharyas, but now we could even further back to this lady, Mrs. Locke, of all people.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
that's amazing. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I wonder, was the influence also of Tagore or Thakur, on her too, his writings. And they must have discussions even with Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, he writes about their relationship, right? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, so this opening page was likely the young Bhaktivinoda Thakur's introduction to Mrs. Locke's work. How heartwarming he must have found it. How humbled he must have how humbled he must have felt to see an American Christian woman writing about Krishna on the first page of her book. Was it this revelation that elicited the sentiments of an obliged and obedient servant in young Kedarnath? Because that's what he writes on the first page of the Poryad, right? Obliged and obedient servant of Mrs. Locke. Mrs. Luck carries on extolling Gupta Vrindavan for over 4 pages, describing its beauty and sacred atmosphere, dubbing it an Eden and paradise of joy. She even adds another footnote explaining the name and its significance for her readers. And so she calls it Vrindias, or Vrindia's private garden. The real Gupto Vrindavan is situated at Kashipur or Benares and received its name in honor of Vrindia, who, for her faithfulness to Radhika, principal wife of the god Christo, he had 1,600, say the Hindus, obtained her confidence and affection. Oh my God, this is so interesting. Her understanding of everything. Okay. Part way through her collection, she glorifies Gupta Vrindavan again. She says, oh God, I don't know how you say that word, Elysian. Okay, yes, it's heavenly. Okay, so among the Elysian spots I've seen, or the heavenly spots I've seen, in these far distant lands, the loveliest and the most renowned, this fairy garden stands. The fairy garden. At the end of her book, in the prose section, she again praises Gupta Vrindavan, breaking back into verse form. Elysian spot, I soon may be called to leave the soil that embraces thee. But worthier ones of the other name, oh, sorry, but worthier ones of other name will sing thy praise and speak thy fame. Sweet nourishon de muses, tis meet. I don't know how you say that, but whatever. You lay your tribute at the feet of them who o'er these grounds preside, great Krishna and his sacred bride. From north to south, from east to west, to Gupta Brindavan, the blessed, bring laurels fresh and lay them down, and for each deity form a crown.
So, sweet nourishment of the muses. Nourrissant des muses.
Oh yes, it's sweet nourishment of the muses. Yeah.
That's,
Oh, sorry, what is that?
it's a,
Okay.
meaning like
Uh,
nourishment, the sweet nourishment of the muses.
okay, that's the meaning of that. Okay. And here's a picture of the Krishna Chura or peacock flower. It's that flower right there. Interesting. Okay, so the brilliant and okay, now I know I'm going over time. I did start 15 minutes late today, so we've been reading for 53 minutes so far. But I do want to finish this today because I want to move on to Śrīla Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura songs again. So I'm just going to go over time. But if anybody needs to leave, Dandavat Pranams, thank you so much for joining. And Haribol and Adi Krishna Prabhu. Okay, so the brilliant and Rasik Kashi Prasad Ghosh. And remember, Kashi Prasad Ghosh is Śrīla Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura's maternal uncle, who was the first Indian to publish a book of English poetry. Okay, so it is likely that Kashi Prasad Ghosh is responsible for Mrs. Luck's knowledge of Krishna and her enchantment with Gupta Vrindavan. In his autobiography, Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions several times that Kashi Babu, that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur called Kashi Prasad Ghosh, he lived in the gardens. The Thakur does not mention its seven tanks or Gupta Vrindavan, but says that he would visit Kashi Babu and then would walk from Paikpada, which is an 8-minute walk from the entrance of the Seven Tanks estate today, to his college at Patal Danga. The Thakur also recalls celebrating Saraswati Puja and Julan Yatra at the house of Kashi Prasad Ghosh, which brings us to the topic of Kashi Prasad's own poetry. In 1830, 8 years before the Thakur's birth, Kashi Prasad, a youth of 21, was, by his own humble claim, the first Hindu to publish a volume of English poetry. His book, The Shire and Other Poems, drew profuse praise from the Anglo-Indian Society. He is quoted as saying that though he composed many songs in Bengali, he had a greater body of work in English and found it easier to express himself in English. Interesting. The title of his collection, The Shire, is a lengthy and beautifully crafted creation modeled to some degree on Sir Walter Scott's The Lay of the Last Minstrel. The next item in Ghosh's collection is The Hero's Reward, a dramatic poetic telling of the story of King Pururava, who became the consort of the most beautiful Apsara, Urvashi, and he's also credited with bringing fire to mankind. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And is also credited with bringing fire to mankind, which makes him the Vedic, how do you say that? How do you say that? Prometheus. Prometheus. I don't know how to say that. Interestingly enough, this Pururava is the first Puru, ancient father of Porus. It might be safe to say that Bhaktivinoda Thakur found the inspiration from the Poryad in his uncle's poetry. One can only wonder what kinds of conversations Bhaktivinoda Thakur must have had with his literary genius of an uncle who had recognized his potential, brought him to Kolkata, and aided him at every step of his development. Kashi Prasad Ghosh undoubtedly played a profound role in what were very formative years for the Thakur, and it is possible he sowed the seed of something most sacred and esoteric, Vraja Bhakti, and more specifically, Madhur Ras Upasana. Why this claim? Well, the central portion of Ghosh's collection features 11 poems, each dealing with a different Hindu festival, ranging from Dashahara to Akshay Tritiya. The following are excerpts from poems discussing Ras Yatra, Janmashtami, and Julan Yatra. So this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's uncle, what he wrote about the Ras Yatra. He says, behold young Krishna's azure hue is like the spring cloud's lovely blue, with sparkling eyes like diamonds proud. And there is Radha by his side, in budding youth and beauty's pride, like lightning clinging to a cloud. That's actually in, where is that? I think that might be in the Vrindavanashtakam of Rupa Goswami. But yeah, there's a description of lightning to a cloud, static lightning to a cloud, that he describes Radha and Krishna like that. Um, like like the bow that Kama strings are her lips of ruby light, whence the smiles that round she flings, like his darts of swiftest flight. Pierce the youthful, pierce the youthful bosom deep, not as veins with poison's pain, but a softness by which sleep, griefs and cares, mischances train. Didn't actually understand the last 4 lines there. Anyhow. Okay, so now Janmashtami. Look how beautiful the newborn boy reclines upon its mother's cautious arm, like young hope resting in the breast of joy, around whom wantons every infant charm, which makes with future hope all bosoms warm, of thronging men and many a saintly sage, who gazed delighted on young Krishna's form. For now the long oppressive baneful age will be no more ere long, will be no more ere long, and fiends will cease to rage. And now here's Jula Nyatra. The verdant boughs in Krishna's bowers of pines and limes are waving gay, where pleasures with their hands made ours, and rosy love together play. And Krishna there is circled round with many a youthful maiden fair, whose moonbeam colored brows are bound with wreaths of flowers best growing there. I leave it, now Shivas is continuing on, I leave it to the reader to decide from these excerpts what caliber of devotee Kashi Prasad Ghosh may have been. I have my own impression of who he is in relation to Bhaktivinoda Thakur and the eternal scheme of Bhagavan's pastimes, but I cannot declare such a thing openly. Read his poems and decide for yourself. So here's a picture of a portrait of Kashi Prasad Ghosh by John Cochran, or however you say his name. It's a neat hat. He doesn't look very Bengali, does he? Kashi Prasad Ghosh. Okay, so what remains now is to circle back to Mrs. Locke. There is plenty more to say of her poetry and what it reveals about her, but I'll try to be brief and summarize what I've gleaned from my reading. I remember when Shivas found that book from Mrs. Locke, and it is the most flowery writing I've ever seen. It's like ridiculously flowery. You can find the book Leisure Hours online if you just type it up. But Shrivas and I were just like, we were laughing so much because it was just like so over the top. Um, but Mrs. Luck appears to have been a unique personality, especially for her time, who was first drawn to embark on a solo journey to India on the invitation of a worshipper of Jagannath, who wanted her to educate his young daughter. Her poems, which are often dated, span a number of years and reveal that though she initially had some typically Christian views of bringing enlightenment to Hindu lands, once she lived in India for some time, she fell deeply in love with its atmosphere and people. She appears to have become disillusioned with the church and those who but wear Christian garb, and with those who but wear Christian garb. She glorifies the humble Hindu who is simple and pure at heart while condemning the insincere Christian. At the same time, she stays true to her Christian American values, beckoning Indians to shake off any morbid religion, embrace the age of science, and champion the rights of women. In many places, her poems offer the same kind of wisdom taught in the Vaishnava scriptures. She encourages the Afghan military general Hyder Khan to face the foes within. She writes, a band more numerous, more powerful, more difficult to subjugate, the foes within. She writes incessantly of God, of the beauty and glory of his creation, of the importance of trusting in him through times of hardship, and of the importance of tolerance. Mrs. Locke was clearly someone and who felt deeply and also had the ability to express such things effectively. She writes many poems about acquaintances or friends who have passed, manifesting her appreciation of them. She writes of charming young Indian children she met and adored, from which her longing to be a mother is touchingly evident. She writes poems addressed to a sister and nephew back in America, whom she misses dearly. She also writes of Jesus with profound devotion, verging on a respectfully romantic love. She writes in Evening Aspirations in Leisure Hours, page 213, she says, I wish on Jesus' loving breast to lean my head, for there is rest. Rest for the weary, sick and faint. Rest for the weary, sick and faint. peace that will banish all complaint. Huh, interesting. Mrs. Luck clearly possessed qualities befitting any devotee of God, and it is safe to say Kashi Prasad Ghosh shared his own faith with her, which had a profound and lasting impact. She does not write in glorification of any other poet in her collection. She names him and his collection and gushes over it. And she was really gushing. We read that before, right? It was like her compositions and footnotes suggest quite plainly that she read with deep appreciation Ghos's poems of Radha and Krishna and the extensive accompanying endnotes he provided to edify his Western readership. Mrs. Locke and Mr. Ghosh were about the same age, and Ghosh's fame would have been well established by the time she came into his orbit. If Ghosh did live in the Gupta Vrindavan area of Dum-Dum, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur's autobiography suggests, it is possible he was responsible for her distinct appreciation of that garden. Perhaps they had taken strolls there during which he had introduced her to the glories and mysteries of the original Vrindavan. Mrs. Locke shows rather well-informed appreciation for Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan, especially for a missionary Christian. She writes of the Gupta Vrindavan garden as her dearest sanctuary, a place of divine inspiration that she expects to miss painfully when she must leave. Of course, whatever her poetry expresses, Mrs. Locke was perhaps a somewhat different person when she returned to Kolkata almost a decade later, after having been remarried and become a mother. Records of the American Baptist Missionary Union show that she joined her husband, the Reverend in Prom, Burma, Burma, until 1874, when she had to return to America for the sake of her own health. The Reverend stayed on and died 2 years later. Since that time, reads Mrs. Locke's 1899 obituary, she has resided chiefly in Brooklyn with her sister, and in the midst of many sorrows, her trust in the Lord has continued bright and firm, and she has always manifested a lively interest in the missionary work in Burma. While it is unclear why Mrs. Locke was back in Kolkata around 1856 to 1857, it is clear she had maintained her acquaintance with Kashi Prasad Ghosh and his circle. The suggestion that the Thakur gives in his autobiography is that it was Mrs. Locke who initiated their first meeting through Reverend Dahl. Had the Thakur's uncle prompted this, or recommended it? Or had Mrs. Locke taken an interest in the rising young poet Kedarnath of her own accord? Many questions remain, but an intriguingly opaque image of that period, those personalities, and their connections to each other has emerged. What glows brightest of all is the pure devotion they shared, the evidence of which they each left in black and white, in old booklets of poetry now forgotten by our modern world and its frenzied pace towards the gnashing jaws of greed and destruction. I pray for a return of the gentle, godly poets of all true religions, if not in person, then in spirit. Might they come to dance on our tables? Like, remember she was seeing spirits dancing on the tables? So if we cannot see them, perhaps we might at least hear them. Like Śrīla Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura said, I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. And then at the end of this article, he says, notes that direct links to the aforementioned works of Kashi Prasad Ghosh, Mrs. Locke, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur can be found below in sources 2 to 4. Please do find the opportunity to sit with their words in your leisure hours. You will not regret it. So you can find all the links here. Very fascinating, huh? All right, so that's our reading for today. Very interesting new history. And yeah, thanks for joining us, staying all the way till the end. And Srivas also published some other poems by Kashi Prasad Ghosh on on big drum if you want to read those. All right. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jai Shri Sachinandan Gaur Hari Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai. Jai Shri Gurudev Ki Jai. Jai Shri Param Gurudev Ki Jai. Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Shri Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura Ki Jai. Jai Shri all of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's invaluable treasures he's left for us. Ki Jai. Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Jai Shri Rupanu Gauriya Guru Varga Ki Jai. Swaparshachi Gaur Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai. Jai Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shinitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavashacha Krishna Bhakti Pradadevi Satyavatai Namo Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Dandavat pranams Nri Hari Prabhu Bhavatarani Mataji Premavati Didi Gokuleshwari Didi Anadi Krishna Prabhu Pramila Didi Acharya Nishta Prabhu Dinesh Prabhu Ganga Mataji Vidyalalasa Didi Vangshiwala Prabhu. Vangshiwala Prabhu says Seven Tanks Estate still exists as the Kasipur Club in Kolkata. You can Google search Seven Tanks Estate. Cool. Maybe I'll check that out when I'm in Kolkata if I'm ever in Dum Dum. All right. Dandavat pranams, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow to continue reading from Sharanagati. Tomorrow we'll be going through the song Vidyara Vilase. Is there anything anybody wants to mention before we end the stream for today?
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so happy you were here for this also because you knew more, like you knew about like a lot of things about what we're reading. So all those things, all those insights you shared were really nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu. Wonderful.
Dandavat pranams. Haribol.